Hello, folks, and welcome to another webinar from the Climate Emergency Centre Network. Today we have a great pleasure in introducing Dave Smith, who I met through the Occupy movement. And basically, Dave was campaigning about blacklisted construction union activists. And he's here tonight to discuss the need for a just transition and for a bottom-up workers' active involvement in the climate movement. He's going to be talking about historical and contemporary examples of unions taking collective action to defend the environment. And unions have a very long, strong and proud history in this country and around the world. I heard recently there was a big campaign about, getting us, the less working hours started in Australia on May Day and went around the world. Collective action can change the world. So we've got a couple more beaming in there, but let's come over to Dave. Thanks very much for coming, Dave. Tell us some more, and thanks for all your campaigning. Solidarity. Over.
Very much. Thank you all very much for the invite, especially Phoenix. Last time I saw him, we were down in Glastonbury together. I very much enjoyed it at that evening.
Just going to mute a couple. Carry on, Dave.
Yep. Essentially, for people who don't know me already, I'm really a trade union activist. Is what I have done, and what I've done for all of my adult life. My background is in the building industry, and they reached a point where the big multinationals in the construction industry really don't like trade unionists, so they very famously blacklisted us. Put our names on a sort of list that they shared amongst all the big multinationals, and every time we tried to get a job, we would be turfed out of a job. It's turned into a big campaign, and because it's going on this week as well, some of you have probably picked up all the stuff that's going on in the public inquiry about undercover policing at the moment, because it wasn't only the big multinational building companies that were spying on us, it was also the police. So some of the I knew some of these undercover police officers, and I'm part of the public inquiry, as John was also spied on by the Phoenix was also spied on by these undercover coppers. They turned up to my union meetings. I've been on picket lines with some of them. I've been at conferences with some of them. The undercover police officers chaired some of the meetings. I say that because it's going to, but some of the stuff I talk about later is going to sort of have a little bit of relevance to some of that. But I'm not here to talk about blacklisting and undercover coppers. I'm here to talk about the climate emergency and the need for just transition. And I think my starting point is always this: the science is real. Climate change is real. If anyone, if we have to have this, nonsense argument about, it could be, sun flares or whatever. Yeah, it could be many things, but the science really is irrefutable on this. Global temperatures are rising, and the primary cause for it is the massive increase in carbon emissions since industrialisation, beyond any doubt whatsoever. Therefore, once we all agree about the science, then the question becomes, well, what we're going to do about it. And quite clearly, across the political spectrum, there's a sort of, difference of opinions of this, but, anyone pretty much on the left or sort of the green left is pretty much arguing that we need, the science is telling us we need to take carbon out of the economy, so that's what we need to do. Take the carbon out of the economy, or else the effects on the planet and humanity is going to be pretty devastating. Technology in the sense of solar, wind, tidal renewables are already there in a vast, in a majority of cases, to make a major significant impact. And hopefully the petrochemicals and hydrocarbons are going to be a thing of the past. But the other thing about being on the left, of course, is, we're not, I say this in the nicest way that I possibly can, but we're not hippies. Some of my best friends are hippies, but that's we're on the left. There's a recognition that there is a power imbalance, within the society we live in, and the fact that the vast majority of people, on the planet might recognise the fact that actually, yeah, we need to take petrochemicals and carbon out of the economy completely. Most people, when you talk to them, believe David Attenborough on this rather than believing politicians. We recognise that something needs to be done, but the fight is going to be against corporate power. We can't get away from that. This is all about major global corporate interests. This is all about the biggest polluters in the world are not individuals. This shaming individuals about, oh my God, you've got your central heating up too high. Oh my God, you're driving an old car that pollutes things, because you're poor. This is not only is it ridiculous, it misses the point completely. 70% of all greenhouse gas emissions are produced by 100 of the largest corporations in the world. 70% of them. Individuals telling my granny to turn her heating down in the winter when she can't afford to pay the bloody heating in the first place. It's just going to, literally have a worse impact than turn your heating up, put your electric blanket on to keep yourself warm. Is what I tell my elderly relatives in the winter. What we need to do is tackle the issues of major employers, and the three largest industrial sectors that are responsible for the vast majority of all of the pollution, carbon pollution in the world, is the energy sector, transport, and manufacturing. But, and here we go, while we're talking about power imbalance, the largest single institution for emitting carbon in the entire planet, but bigger than any individual corporation, is the US military, which is completely taken out of any discussion, because they talk about big business, they talk about consumers, they talk about countries, and actually the US military emits more carbon than countries the size of Norway and Switzerland and people like that. It's just ridiculous. Yeah. And Norway's bloody one of the world's biggest oil producers. So
they didn't even count it for the Paris Climate Summit in all the emissions or anything. Just the US military figures were completely exempt. Yeah, it's ginormous. Yeah,
it's just unless we can sort of get our head around this, then I don't think we're really going anywhere. And so of course, it's good to have solar panels and electric cars and air source pumps. I'll put my hand up and admit I've got we've got an electric car, we've got solar panels, and we've got air source pumps. It's saving us a fortune. It's it's actually cheaper to have them things than it is than to go the other way, and I feel personally better for it. But to be honest, every single one of us could have one of them, and turn the temperatures down, have more insulation. That's not what's going to need to change. If we're trying to defeat corporate power, if we're trying to change the way the global economy works, then we need mass people power to do it. Because individuals turning their thermostat down ain't going to make any difference. And look, I'm a big fan of direct action and civil disobedience. It's part of my DNA. But heroic individual protesters alone are not going to defeat corporate power either. Applause to anyone who's doing that stuff. I've been arrested myself for participating in direct action. I'm not here to. This isn't a sort of an internal criticism within the movement, but genuinely to change and tackle, mass corporate power, we need mass global people power, which means that the mass of working people need to be on our side as well. And some of those people, of course, do work in these industrial sectors that I've just sort of mentioned already. Some of these people do work in the transport industry. Some of these people do work in, the energy industry. Some of these people do work in manufacturing. And there is a part of me that says the whole point of just transition is about how we're going to win. Because if we don't win the mass of people onto our side for this, and not just as, say, oh yes, in a survey that, the majority of people support us, we need to mobilize people to actually take some kind of action. No one's going to do that if it means they're going to be out of work. No one's going to mobilise to sack themselves or mobilise to make themselves redundant. And so I think what is needed here is, there was a discussion earlier on. Someone mentioned it about, some of the workers in the oil and gas industry in the North Sea, are raising concerns about losing their jobs. Well, to be honest, if the option is, lose this well-paid, unionised, secure job that you've had for 10 years, or, basically be on the dole and go back to, being self-employed. A lot of these people are a lot of these people are scaffolders and electricians and engineers. If they were not working in the North Sea, they're working on building sites where it's completely casualised. Everyone's self-employed. There's barely any trade union organisation. So I mean, no one's putting their hand up to lose their job. And if we want to convince people, we need to argue that what we need is a transition from a carbon economy to a non-carbon economy. And those workers are already skilled. Those workers are already, highly skilled, highly unionised. In some cases, very good at organising industrial action and protest. They've got a history of it. To how we get them to, in the non-carbon economy, still to have decent jobs, still to have secure jobs, still to have unionised jobs. Because we saw what happened in the coal mining industry. I'm old enough to remember the miners' strike, and very bluntly, the demand in the coal mining strike in 1984, 1985 was coal, not dole, because that was the option. Now looking back, we would say, oh look, we should have taken carbon out of the economy. But the dispute, the miners' strike wasn't about that. It was about destroying the organised working class. National Union was a very powerful, strong trade union. But where the mines have been closed, and there's not a single coal mine, deep coal mine. I don't think there's any coal mines in Britain anymore. Although they're thinking of reopening one up in Cumbria, if I remember rightly. Which we should oppose completely. But when the coal mines were closed, what were vibrant communities with healthy social life, community life, with bands, with community centres, all the rest of it, basically are desolate. Lots of my friends are coal miners up in Yorkshire. They tell me the villages they live in are just bloody big drug dens. They're in the middle of nowhere. All the kids are unemployed. If there is any jobs available, it's working on 0 hours contracts. It's just like the entire fabric of their society has fell apart. And we don't need that, and we don't want that. And no one's going to vote for it, and no one's going to come and mobilise on our behalf for it. So what we do need is trade unions. And lots of people in the room at the beginning mentioned that they were in various different trade unions. So I'll make the point that in a lot of this conversation, I do differentiate between the sort of the bureaucracy at the top of the trade unions and the more rank and file elements of the trade unions, which, this bureaucracy versus rank and file isn't something that the left have discovered. The first person to ever mention that was Sidney and Beatrice Webb, who were in the 19th century, and they were the Fabians, the organisers of the Fabian Society, and they set up the London School of Economics. They were the first people to describe the difference between the bureaucracy at the top of the trade union movement and the rank and file at the bottom, sometimes having different opinions about how things should happen, but also different priorities as well. So I think sometimes there is a criticism of the trade union movement that it's almost like a black and white binary sort of opinion of it, that the trade unions are part of the problem. And of course, in some certain circumstances, the trade unions can be part of the problem. There's no doubt about that whatsoever. But the trade unions can be, on one hand, a big bureaucracy, which is an obstacle to taking action, but also the exact same organisation has also got elements within it that are part of a wider social movement for social justice and always have been. Whether we look back at the Chartists or the Luddites or whoever it happens to be, the trade union movement are fight in front of some of the biggest steps forward in history. Eugene Varlin is one of my all-time heroes. He was one of the communards who was executed. When they set up the Paris Commune, he was the general secretary of the Printers Union in Paris at the time. There's a painting of him that hangs in the Louvre, for God's sake. Trade unions have also played, progressive movement, but also progressive movement on the environment. And a lot of this is completely missed in a lot of conversations about trade unions. And actually, lots of trade unionists who may have been active for many, many years will have missed some of these things. I'm sure a lot of people in this room will have heard of a lot of the stuff I'm going to talk about, maybe not all of the stuff I was going to talk about. So I talked about who was one of my heroes, Eugene Varlin. I'm never quite sure how you pronounce it, one of the communards. But another one of my heroes are the BLF, the Builders Labourers Federation. They're an Australian building workers union, and they existed in Australia in the 1960s and 1970s. They don't exist anymore. Through mergers, they've turned into another union, the CFMEU. But back in the 1960s and 70s, there was, the BLF was it's Building Labourers Federation, so it wasn't skilled workers. It was the sort of more unskilled workers within the sector, and you had historically it'd been a very right wing trade union, but it also always had a very, very active rank and file that sometimes organised their own disputes. And one year, the rank and file won all the elections for the leadership of the union, and basically swept the board. And for a period of about 10 years in the late 60s to mid 70s, they basically ran a trade union like I want every trade union in the world to run. I mean, they started off by doing good old-fashioned safety and industrial action about pay, and got the workers, the unskilled workers, pay virtually up to the same rate as the skilled workers pay through militant industrial action. But the thing that made them famous was this thing called green bands. So what would happen is, and remember, they've had a couple of years of lots of industrial action where the workers have took action independently and won themselves, major improvements in pay and that. They reached a point where they started taking industrial action over the environment. So their first instance of this was a dispute called Kelly's Bush. So Kelly's Bush is an area of Sydney Harbour, which is like literally the only part of Sydney Harbour directly on the waterfront that hadn't been built on. A big developer had built it and was going to, knock all of this down and build sort of big tower blocks and all the rest of it. And there was a local community campaign in order to defend, save Kelly's Bush, that was run by, the local people basically, who took their dog for a walk there and enjoyed the open space. And they came to the union and said, "You're the biggest union here. Your members are going to be asked to come in and knock this down and build houses on it. We're appealing to you that you shouldn't do it." And so the union would then hold mass meetings of their members, and some of the footage of these mass meetings back in the day is spectacular. I mean, literally thousands of workers debating whether they should participate in this in this construction project or not, and they'd vote on it. And if they decided no, we're not doing it, then no one would work on that job. And then if people were coming in to sort of scab on the job and the union would put a blockade on the job. to defend Kelly's Bush. And it just wasn't that. It was thousands of projects across Australia, but mainly in New South Wales. I mean, not only New South Wales. I mean, these green bands ended up being everywhere. Centennial Park in the middle of Sydney. Sydney were trying to get the Olympics back in the early 70s. They never got it, but the plan was that they were going to get the Olympics, and they were going to knock down, then Centennial Park, which is the big, massive park in the middle of Sydney. They were going to bulldoze that and build the stadium and the Olympic Village on that. And once again, the locals appealed to the union, and they came and basically said, "We're not building it," and it never got done because the union was so strong and so powerful at the time. There was this other section called the Rocks, and the Rocks is the oldest sort of piece of inhabited housing still existing in the whole of Australia, and it's quite close to Sydney Harbour, and it was quite run down. It tended to be poor families there. It tended to be dockers, wolfies as they're known, and artists and that kind of stuff who lived there. But it was bought up by a big corporation who once again was going to knock everything down and build these massive tower blocks. And the union went in, once again, a community campaign to not build this down. The union went in and said, "We're not knocking this place down. It's going to have to stop." And once they've had it, there's video footage of the General Secretary and the union being arrested on the picket line, because the bulldozers are going to go in and knock down the houses, and they've got hundreds of construction workers there stopping the houses being knocked down by scab labour. They ended up, the big business thugs literally murdered people in the Rocks campaign. But to this day, the Rocks still exists because they won. This is the key thing about the BLF. The Green Bands won. They stopped the Rocks being knocked down. To this day, the Rocks is now a UNESCO World Heritage Site in Australia. And the General Secretary of the thing, his name was Jack Mundy. There's a great big statue of him in the middle of the Rocks, thanking the BLF for the people who saved it. This is the man who was sent to prison for doing that at the time, but was mobilising, thousands of construction workers on it as well. And it wasn't just that. I mean, they refused to knock down sort of churches and historical buildings. The first ever urban Aboriginal land rights victory was in a place called Kookaburra. I might have got that name wrong, but it was certainly a job where it was going to be knocked down. The BLF refused to do any work on it. Because they refused to do any work on it, they effectively gave it to the Aboriginals who were living in there. It's the first ever Aboriginal urban land rights victory ever, and they were so political when the South African apartheid rugby team came to South Africa to tour, the BLF, remember, these are all construction workers. The BLF basically said to all their members, "Get tickets for the match. Get tickets for the match." When the match started, the BLF invaded the pitch, and the chairman, the president of the union, a bloke called, oh God, what's his name? Can't remember his name. I feel annoyed now. He'll come back to me in a minute. They got a chainsaw out and cut down the goalposts for the blooming rugby game against the Springboks. He went to prison for that. All of their union all of these rank and file leaders were being sent to prison. They, in one dispute about Bob Pringle, his name is. Sorry, it's come back to me. In one dispute in a university, the university had sacked some women professors for running a women's rights course and for running an LGBT course. The construction workers doing building work on the university came out on strike to get the women their job back, to get the women professors their job back, and made sure that an LGBT course could be run on there. There's this complete sort of story that all construction workers are these horrible lumpen sort of thugs. I mean, we're a bit rough around the edges at times, you may have noticed, but we're also sometimes the salt of the earth, and these people just heroes of ours. But this kind of stuff also happened in Britain. There was a because it was such a big deal that everyone was talking about it. I've got where's the book? Oh God, I've got the book. I haven't got my glasses on. I can't see it. It's up here. Here again. See, if you want to get the book, here it is. Green Band's Red Union. It's an absolute Verity and Meredith Bergman wrote it. They're two. They both used to live in the UK. I think they were activists in the UK for a little while, but I mean they're Australian. I think one of them's a member of Parliament nowadays, and one of them's a sort of, to this day, a well-known sort of activist and professor. Brilliant book. We used to share this around on building sites in Britain in the 1990s when this book came out. We just shared around with people, and the reason I say it is because my blacklist file, I talked about being blacklisted, and if you were on the blacklist, the Information Commissioner's Office seized all the blacklist files for various workers, and if you thought you were on it, you could apply and get a copy of your own file. Phoenix, you've got a blacklist file, have you? Yeah, yeah, they did. The police were providing information, so a lot of it is on trade.
I'm on a few files, I think, over 35 years of activism, Dave.
Yeah, I think you're not the only one. Yeah. But this was supposedly a set of data that was collected by construction companies, but quite clearly a lot of it was provided by the police as well, which they've admitted nowadays. But there's most of my things on my blacklist file is about when I've complained about overflowing toilets or unpaid wages, or I've organised a strike on asbestos, or whatever it happens to be. I mean, it's 36 pages long. They've got every job I worked on in a 10-year period, and every job they sacked me on in a 10-year period written down on it. But one of the things is on there is about J18, because I was actually on strike in the middle of Finsbury Square during J18. They just sacked me. Tarmac had just sacked me. And Earth First were doing a campaign at the time called Target Tarmac. And they came up and met me on June the 17th on the picket line, me and a few other workers on June the 17th. They said, oh, there's going to be a big protest up here tomorrow. You interested in this? And we went, oh, okay, what's it all about? Told us about it. So we went and knocked up a flyer at the time, which was called, and the flyer is in my blacklist file, and the flyer was called, construction workers and environmental activists should unite. I think what were you called in the day? You weren't called environmental activists at the time. What were you? Eco warriors. That was the day, wasn't it, if I remember rightly? Eco warriors and construction workers should unite. And that was in it. And the leaflet was put out in the name of the Friends of Jack Mundy, who is this Australian construction union leader who got sent to prison. And the construction companies in this country were so dopey that they actually opened a blacklist file on Jack Mundy because they thought he was one of the people organising the dispute in this country. So yeah, but also, not only the BL, I mean, inevitably, this is capitalism. If you don't win, then they crush us. The BLF were crushed after about 10 or 15 years, even though they got loads more women in the into the union, into the sector, loads more first time they've got loads of Aboriginal workers as union organisers as well, and women as union organisers. There's a brilliant film called Rocking the Foundations, which I was going to show a version of a little bit later, which shows some of this stuff, which was made at the time in the 1970s. It's absolutely spectacular, and you're almost in tears watching it. But this stuff sort of fed out as well. So in the 70s in Britain, famously there was this thing called the Lucas Plan. I'm sure I'm not telling people stuff they haven't heard of. But big engineering plant, Lucas, made weapons, basically. They were going to make people redundant, and the union came up with an alternative plan. And the alternative plan is, instead of closing the factories, why don't we use this exact same machinery, the exact same expertise of this, of this workforce, in order to make stuff that's productive? They were talking about electric cars. They were talking about, satellite dishes back then in the 1980s, that they could do it. A few years later, 10 years later, British Aerospace, the Filton plant in Bristol, if anyone knows, big up the Bristol Massive, if you're out there. It's exactly the same kind of thing went on. And in fact, one of my when I did my PhD down in Bristol, my supervisor, his name was Andy Danford, and he was the lead shop steward in Filton, British Aerospace plant at the time, and he was the person who organised their alternative plan. And their alternative plan, once again, was, instead of making weapons, we should make all these socially used. I mean, they were talking about wind turbines and stuff like that, solar panels. I've seen the reports.
That's a brilliant plan. That's what we should be doing.
Precisely.
Tooling from the arms industry into renewables. I was telling Dale Vince about that at Glastonbury, and he hadn't heard of it. It's like, this is what we need to do. The oil workers, there's a really good film someone mentioned a little while ago about, they wanted to retool into renewables, and they were told there'd be grants and funding, and then the grants and funding got cut, and they're like, well, we're still working on the oil rig. We need to just transition and support it,
Well, sorry, I've gone on rapid on for too long. I do tend to do this. Look, I can do this for ages and ages and ages. I've got loads of other examples, but I just want to finish on one that's actually going on right now at the moment. In Florence, at the moment, there's a factory, the GKN factory in Florence. It's high-end engineering. They make components for Bentleys and Aston Martins and BMWs and stuff like that. That factory has been occupied for 3 years by the workforce, and their demand, because the GKN was going to close the factory, they've been occupying for 3 years, and their demand is, retool it so that we can make renewables, retool it so we can be part of the green economy. 3 years they've been there, and the video footage last weekend, they had a benefit gig for them inside the factory that went on to about 1:30 in the morning. When the benefit gig finished, with like several thousand people at this benefit gig, they then marched through the centre of Florence at 2:30 in the morning, and there's these massive demonstrations with everyone, demanding sort of, transition to the green economy, and to save jobs, save the planet. So yeah, I've gone on for much too long. Sorry, I rant and rant and rant. I should tell
That's
it.
Brilliant. Thank you so much. I mean, there is so much knowledge there, and so much you've been on the front lines of change and campaigning. So we can come to questions, folks. I've got a couple of bits bung in there, but if you wanna, it can be a question, it can be a feedback, it can be a comment. There's a little reactions thing down the bottom there. The little smiley face with a plus. You can raise a hand like that, and then we can tell who wants 1, 2, or 3 or anything, or make a comment or question in the chat. But just to say, Dave, massive respect for what you've been doing. You were really campaigning against by the authorities, and raising awareness about health and safety and really serious issues from asbestos to the rest should not be something you're blacklisted for. It should be something you're supported for. And we really need to get everyone cooperating now, from environmentalists to students to unions to every walk of life. Everyone needs to see beyond that, and actually start intersectionally working together as many different groups of people as possible. So folks, if you've got a question or a feedback or a comment or anything you want to share, stick your hand up or wave your pinky as well. You can do it old school way. Any questions or feedback or comments there for Dave? Morgan. Dinah Morgan. Yes, down in sunny Lewis.
Can you hear me?
Yes.
All right. It's amazing, Dave. It's really so inspirational to hear all that stuff, because I've always wondered why we didn't have like a national strike for the climate with all the unions together and all the eco warriors, because it just makes perfect sense to me. you know that the government now has said no new oil, but we've got this Rosebank nightmare. Do you think there's any appetite in the unions to come out with other people against that? Because, you know, we can write nice letters and stuff, and we will. But I mean, the idea of the unions and everybody else making a big statement. I mean, every time there's a march, I always say it's my last one because it's never reported. But I would march with the unions. Yeah.
Yeah, the Stop Rosebank campaign is run by the same people who did the Stop Cambo campaign, which was another oil field in the North Sea that was going to be opened up. And what was innovative about that is they did go and talk to the workers. They literally went, and I've sat on the same platform with one of the people who led this campaign. It's the new campaign is Stop Rosebank. But they're basically, you know, big oil deposits in the North Sea. But the Cambo one was stopped. They literally stopped it. And part of the presentation and part of the campaign was going to the trade unions and getting the trade unions to say what they wanted instead. Because it's not just say, oh, no, look, we won't do this and all of you are going to be out of work. They literally worked with, I think, OILC, Offshore Industry Liaison Committee. It was set up in the North Sea. Originally, it was like a rank and file group. I can find the. Have I got the Cambo link? No, I was looking at it a little bit earlier. It's relatively easy to find. If you put Stop Rosebank, it comes up. Yeah, the Offshore Industry Liaison Committee was set up as a rank and file response to the Piper Alpha disaster. After all of those workers died when because the oil company cut corners and killed 187 workers. And what happened was they organised sit-ins on the oil rigs and on the gas fields, and literally closed down any production for sometimes days on end in order to improve health and safety on there. Most of the activists who did it inevitably were blacklisted. They're on the same blacklist as me and Phoenix are. But they did, at least periodically improve health and safety there. So there's that. They're now part of the RMT. They were so well organised that they ended up being subsumed within the RMT. And also, I think Unite have got some pretty good activists working in the North Sea as well, who are very interested in the just transition stuff. I've actually seen some of the literature that they produce. And there's a very good film out at the moment by Real News. If anyone doesn't follow Real News, then you really should. They're the best people out there at producing video activism based on the trade unions, or very much rank and file. If there's a bottom up approach, whether it's to trade unionism, to fighting fascism, or the environment, or the climate, they're the people who have videoed it over the last 10 years, and they've got a film called Everything Must Change. Which isn't actually up on their website, because what they're doing is making a point of showing it in areas, getting everybody along, and then having debates about how you can work together. And what it does is links the cost of living crisis with the migrant crisis, with the climate crisis, and brings everyone together. And there's a whole section of it which is about trade unions, taking a lead in fights to save the environment. It's really inspiring. And some of the stuff with they went to America and went through America Real News a couple of years ago and talked to loads of sort of grassroots campaigns. A lot of them were sort of community campaigns, but a lot of them were trade union campaigns exactly around this transitioning from going from fossil fuels into a cleaner economy. And a lot of the workers, of course, where they had these plants tended to be poor areas, really polluted, predominantly Black and Hispanic workforce, you know, are taking the lead in these campaigns. It's some of the videos that Real News produce. I can't praise them enough, to be honest. They're doing a, you know, they are the archive, you know, for our movement over the last 10 years, really. God,
I don't think enough people really realise how many of our rights have come through protests and then come through the unions. I mean, you know, we do the 40 years of resistance exhibition, and you know, we're only highlighting kind of, you know, Greenham Common and the poll tax and the road protest onwards in the last 40 years. But you know, in some of the research, I didn't realise that. I think where May Day came from, you know, we have International Workers' Day. May Day was Australian workers.
Chicago.
Was it Chicago? Okay, Chicago. It's something about they were doing 16-hour days, and they said, right, let's have a protest and make International Workers' Day about having an 8-hour day, which was radical then. 8 hours.
Oh no, it's even more radical than that. So May Day is there was a campaign about the 8-hour day in Chicago, and the leaders of the campaign who wrote a pamphlet were all arrested. And some people who hadn't even written the campaign were arrested, and then they were executed in Chicago in the 1880s. And the unions, a year after, they were executed on the 1st of May, and then the year after, the unions organised a demonstration on the 1st of May. It was the first Bring All Workers Together demonstrations. Yeah. Famously, Emma Goldman was part of the campaign. For the anarchists in the room amongst us. So
everything from paid holidays to, you know, to weekends, to all these different rights that people don't realise, you know, have been struggled and fought for along the way, and quite often organised unions and things have pushed for them. You know, Martin, do you want to say a little bit about? You said something there in the chat about the 44th anniversary or something, and you're doing a chat. Do you want to say?
I just want to add a bit to what Dave is. Well, you see, I've been campaigning to support the carbonization of transport for like 25 years of my life, and I think we missed the opportunity with like building bike lanes and setting up the low traffic neighborhoods and lowering the speed limits. This was a valuable option maybe 20, 30 years ago when John Major was in power or Tony Blair, but not now. Now we need to compensate for the lack of reflective surfaces on the planet Earth. That means changing the colors in cities. And a lot of these things can be done cheaply, like painting roofs white, you know, removing so-called urban heat traps. So every dark surface is a heat trap in cities. So every dark roof, every dark road, every car park, and every car park filled with cars. So is just super heat trap. So there is a lot of work for construction workers in just rebuilding cities. So you know, like there's lots of work for plumbers, like every household should have some rainwater collection, so we can capture water, that 1 month of rainfall within 2 hours, you know, so we don't flood everything and so on. So I think there's a lot of things that we can connect when it comes to, you know, how much work there is to be done, and people can get green jobs or clean jobs, you know. So yeah, that's what I wanted to add.
Very, very important. Carol, do you want to say about that? I just saw a film about that, Lakenheath.
Yeah, much as people started the Women's Peace Camp at Greenham to get rid of the cruise missiles, the US cruise missiles, we're now aware that they're planning, the US military are planning to place nuclear weapons at RAF Lakenheath. And so there was a march the day before yesterday, I think, Monday, I think it was. I didn't get there because I've not been too well, but yes, they've now decided to set up a camp. So if people are interested in going along, supporting it any way you can, including, you know, writing to them letters of solidarity, sending them little things, which mean that they, you know, are really aware of it, and then going down, even if it's a day at the weekend or a weekend, or if you wish to, staying there, because that's exactly what happened at Greenham. You know, when we decided that the 9-mile perimeter was not too big for us, not too far for us to link hands around and say, no, you're not keeping them here, they're going, and this will be a bit of green and common land again. And although it took us longer than we anticipated, it is a green and common land now because of people power. And I think this can be done again, and we need to be writing to our so-called representatives and telling them we will not accept nuclear weapons from the US on our soil, because God help us if Trump is president. You know, I think things could escalate quite quickly, as if they're not bad enough. So we need to be working towards peace. Einstein actually said, you cannot simultaneously prepare for and prevent war. True. You know, you cannot prevent war and be, you know, looking at peace and peaceful means of living whilst you are preparing for war. And this shouts of preparing for war. The rhetoric coming out of our TV screens is preparation for war. They are on a war footing. You hear it all the time. And what better way of getting rid of the population that you don't want than going to war? We are seeing it in Gaza and in Ukraine and many other places as well around the globe. There are 50 wars going on at the moment around the globe. This is environmental catastrophe as well. You know, you only have to look at the damage that's being done and the lives being lost. But you know, it's something we've got to stand up against very strongly.
I think that's a really key point, Carol. And just to say, you know, that the Greenham Common Women started as a housewives march, and they got there and they set up, and they were there for many decades. And eventually it led to the strategic arms limitation talks as well in the exhibition, and it reduced massively the nuclear weapons. You know, unless we have things like the Lucas plan, like Dave was saying, and retool from military industrial complex arms, you know, a military industrial complex and arms manufacturing constantly is going to create wars when you arm everyone up on all sides. And, you know, eventually wars start. And, you know, how can we do that transition to renewables, to a green transition? You know, there was a one earlier, I think we had John Sinner from Campaign for Climate Change, and they wrote a book, you know, Jobs for the Climate Emergency, and how we could kind of change things. And, as you know, there's a whole load of oil workers that are saying, we want to shift from the fossil fuel economy, but where are the jobs in the green transition? Where are the Lucas plans? Where is and you know, the very good film, I think I posted it in there, and it's like, they said, one of these guys, you know, his wife's saying he's really environmental and he really wants to shift, you know, and he's got 20 of his mates who are all going to move from being oil workers into making wind and solar, and they're all going to get a $3,000 grant to retrain. And then they were told, no, the grants aren't there anymore. So they carried on working in the oil industry. We have to shift. We have to shift the economy to the renewables.
Well, they have to be in the unions that Dave was talking about, you know, and actually making demands that their industries are moving to a green transition and that they are educated. That's all it takes, education. I've been at a Labour Party conference where a GMB union it was, they voted against something, and that was because you know, the message goes round, you're going to lose jobs. Well, at the moment, the Tata steel workers are actually fighting to retain their jobs, and they're even giving the company ways of doing that. You know, keeping one blast furnace going whilst you do that transition will actually mean that you can continue doing what you're doing without laying off workers whilst you transition to that new way of doing things. And that's all it is. You know, we've evolved to do things differently. When the Industrial Revolution came along, you know, we started using the fossil fuels. But that doesn't mean to say we've got to continue to use the fossil fuels. We don't. But we've got to reprogram how people work. You know, I'll leave it for other people now because there's hands up.
Okay, so I was just saying we're in the last bit, folks. We can go on for till 5 past if we want or so. But if anyone else has got a question, I think Dinah there, Morgan, and is you in Lewis or Seaford, Dinah?
Lewis. I'm in Lewis. I was just going to ask, well, two things. One, with the nuclear stuff, is there a role for unions to strike, not to let that happen by blocking the roads or not allowing access? The other thing is, what about the movement of workers owning their factories, and like with Tata, when that happens, buying it back? I don't really know much about how that could happen, but you've got all these workers who want to do the right thing. They're not able to because the capital, the fixed capital, is in the hands of the owners. But it has happened before that the owners, the workers have got together and somehow got hold of the company and done it themselves. And here we are, if that doesn't happen, these people, excuse my French, aren't going to let them do it any other way unless the workers start doing it for themselves. Oh, sorry, I'm rambling. Anyway, you get what I mean.
It's a good point, Mum. The other week we had Rob Callender doing a talk about community kind of saving clubs, and there are some
because
examples.
of kind of places, so I do get what you mean.
Yeah. Go on, Habiba. Is that you done there? I think one of the examples he was saying was about in Spain. They've got a kind of an amalgamation of co-ops that have brought together and bought.
I was just saying
an amalgamation of co-ops that have brought together and bought factories. Go on, Habiba. You're echoing a bit.
I was just saying.
Go on, Habiba. You're echoing a bit.
I was just saying. I get what you mean. If you worked in those blue collar job places, you've had to get these jobs, and you see all the wrongs, and there isn't anywhere to go really, and it can be really miserable, like being a factory battery head.
I think I'd like to find, I'm trying to remember from a couple of weeks ago what they were called, the Monzo Co-op or something. And they are an amalgamation of lots of co-ops in North Spain. And they've bought back factories and industry and transport. And they're one of the biggest kind of federations of co-ops in Spain. And they are buying back factories. They are buying back different sectors of industry and providing. One does transport, one does accounting, and whatever it is, and they all help each other across the federation. Debs.
I think it was Mondragon. Was it not Mondragon that do it, or the co-op stuff?
Yeah.
Try and look it up. Yeah. Mondragon. And remind me, what's the name of the Unite, that you're a member of? Unite the
I'm with a community branch.
Yeah.
I'm with Unite, but with a community branch as well. And I'd love to be able to get to some of these protests and that, but they're usually all of them down south, apart from a few up here. I'd love to be able to come down.
Deb, I'm a founder member of Unite Community in East London. In fact, one of the first Unite communities that Len McCluskey wanted set up, and we do loads of stuff. And you'd certainly be welcome. Someone would put you up if you want to come down to any of the protests. And tomorrow, earlier in the day, Deepak will be hopefully taking over Parliament, around Parliament, and then we're going to surround Parliament because enough is enough. Everyone's being attacked, by the politics of the day, whichever party you vote for, they're all the same. They're all after getting their minutes of fame and all their dosh they can get, and retiring on a pretty penny at our expense. But I just remembered something. So I've been on one of the shutting down the arms factories. Well, I've been on more than one, but one particular was interesting because it was in Cheltenham in Gloucestershire. And what was interesting about it was that at the crack of dawn, we got there and set up our picket and remained and stopped the work going ahead. You know, let the night workers out, but nobody else got in. We needed a toilet, and there was a local garden centre just about a 5-minute walk away. So we all trundled in because we found out they got a toilet. But actually, so we started to talk to the workers, and the place we shut down was General Electric's, GE, who are making, you know, and repairing the F fighter bomber components and so on that are blasting Gaza at the moment. And so around 500 of us shut down 3 arms factories that day. But the locals in Cheltenham had absolutely no idea that the GE factory 5 minutes from the garden centre was doing this sort of work, had any understanding of them being complicit in what was going on in Gaza. So we educated a few people, and they then started to tweet out to other people a sort of, did you know? And we've now had, because we gave them details and so on, we've now had people joining us. But more than that, because we leafleted, some of the staff in that factory who were leaving and leafleted have also not only joined us, but have left their jobs because they have a conscience. And I think this is what we need to be doing, talking to everyone, letting them know what's being done, supporting any Palestine action or anybody who has been arrested in a very unjust manner, and making sure that everyone knows the facts about their cases and come and support them at the courts and join, defend our juries, because our juries are being directed by judges who want people to be found guilty. So they are not allowing some very important information and defence information into the court. So we need to make sure that people going in who are juries can act on their conscience if they believe someone should not be found guilty, especially because of the bigger picture.
Nice. So I think, you know, we're coming towards the end, folks. If anyone wants to weigh any other last bits in, just to say, you know, we really need cooperation across the board, all sectors of society, but particularly, you know, it's really powerful when you get these intersectional, so there's a modern word for it, groups come together of many different walks of life. And, you know, it's not actually, you know, the latest thing. Back in Reclaim the Streets days, we went up and supported the Liverpool Dockers. There was the March for Social Justice. I think I was just finding a link there and popping that in. You know, it's happened before, and it gets very, very big when you do link up the unions and the environmentalists and lots of other groups together. You know, DPAC and, you know, and Occupy brought many, many groups together, and it's really important that we do reach out. I was it Dinah's idea about a national strike for climate? Well, there's a lively one. You know, if we can get all the unions, the environmental movements, the students, the, you know, as many different groups and as many walks of life, you know, our governments are not listening to us. A lot of them have been captured by fossil fuel industry. So how do we take action that's actually going to create some change? So leaving that thought, if anyone's got any final comments, weigh in, or else you can put 3 words in the group chat if you want about what you thought about tonight. And over to Carol, and then we'll
just a last thing that I thought of. In the election that's just gone, Sharon Graham, General Secretary for Unite the Union, refused to give any money to the election fund from Unite. It's usually been one of the biggest donors and affiliated unions, but they refused to give any money at all. And that was on the basis that the Labour Party manifesto has nothing to support or help green transition or workers. So I've not necessarily been a fan of Sharon Graham's, but I have to say she is really excellent on the industrial branches stuff. And I think that was a magnificent decision of hers and the unions to not support Labour in the last election.
Okay, interesting. Good input, everyone. Debs, and then we'll come over to Dave Smith for the last words and summary. Thank you so much, Dave. Very thought-provoking tonight. Debs.
Yeah, just thinking, like, Dave, you probably go to the, like, Durham Miners Gala, do you? And I think I went last year, didn't go this year because I was at work. But I found it a bit disappointing that, like, I think I heard the climate mentioned twice during the speeches, and that was by the Bakers Union. I think it was Sarah Woolley. That's what I found a bit disappointing about going there. I thought, like, there'd have been a bit more on the climate, like, going on there, but there weren't.
Okay, so just to say briefly, and then coming over to Dave, you know, early on it was mentioned Unite community do have branches all over the country. If your climate emergency centre wants to link with them, 1 or 2 people could become an affiliate member, and I think they were giving out £500 grants to various different groups of people. So it's always good to build alliances and bridge building. Every one of these climate emergency centres, 28 around the country now, are bringing together an alliance of many different groups in that centre on the high street, reaching out to Joe and Jane public of all walks of life, getting together and hopefully cooperating. So Dave, thanks so much. Big up the Occupy, massive. Thank you for all the work with the unions and everything you've been doing. Blacklist support group over years. I'll hand over to you for final comments, and then we'll end the recording for now. If people want to hang around for 5 minutes, 10 minutes, have a chat afterwards, they can.
I'll try and make this very quick because I've been told my dinner's ready. So the people talking about the C&D and the Green and Common camp. The picture I put in earlier on was of a police officer today, who literally in the public inquiry today was the police officer who was sent in to spy on C&D and the
Green
Common Peace camp. They're meant to be, you know, looking at subversives who are going to overthrow parliamentary democracy and plant bombs, and they were going at the Green and Common Peace camp. There was someone, I think it was Morgan, asked about could we get workers to go on strike about that. Well, literally 2 years ago, I was part of a group where we organised unofficial action and closed down the UK atomic weapons establishment at Burfield. You know, you're not allowed to have a protest within 2 miles of that, and we just turned up unannounced and shut the place down. You know, it was great when they turned up with their dogs and their machine guns. What are you going to do? Shoot me while we're being filmed? You know, yeah, that was good. And look, I just think, you know, look, you wouldn't have been on this meeting unless you agree with this already, but nothing changes in the world just because it should. You know, things change because human beings come together and do collective action, but it always needs someone to spark it and encourage it. You know, you might have noticed it from my accent, but I'm from Dagenham, and one of the things we're all proud of in Dagenham is the equal pay dispute at Fords. We didn't get equal pay because they suddenly thought, oh, isn't it a good idea that women get paid the same money as men? They got it because people went on strike and organised for it, and if we can do it in the past, we can do it again in the future. And Phoenix, if there's ever going to be any action and you need someone to come in and do rabble rousing about joining with the workers, then just give me a shout. I'm more than happy to come down and help. Solidarity with everyone here, and I'm looking forward to being on a march or a protest or an occupation with Morgan sometime soon.
Absolutely brilliant. The last example, Equal Pay Act 1970, just sticking a thing in there. Big up the Dagenham women for doing that strike, and all the men for supporting, and everyone. All right, folks, we're going to end the recording there. Hope to see you next week on another ones, or setting up a centre on your high street. Let's reach out to as many people as possible. Keep networking. Dave, massive respect. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dave.
Yes.